Madam President, honourable members of the Court, distinguished colleagues, in this rebuttal, the claimant wants to address three main issues which they think are important in this case. First of all, the legitimate objective. Secondly, presumption of incompatibility. And thirdly, Article 101(3). To start with the legitimate objective, the defendant has stated that the legitimate objective environmental concerns should be taken into account. The claimant states that this is not enough, as the statement stated before. This is a part of the other criteria which should be fulfilled in order to create an object, a restriction by object. And for example, the content of the agreement show a highly anti-competitive nature of this output limitation. For example, it limits consumer choice and it leads to high prices on the market. The second point, the presumption of incompatibility, the nature of this object restriction, make sure that in practice those restrictions are hardly satisfied, those criteria are hardly satisfied, and the difference between object and effect is not relevant in that regard, since object is restricted by nature and should thus have worse effects on competition. Lastly, environmental benefits can indeed be taken into account under Article 101. The claimant doesn't deny that. However, this agreement doesn't fulfill all the criteria of Article 101(3), since the agreement is not indispensable. For example, the defendant could have used the tax incentives of the rotating government, or could have just used the quality and size criteria as the government, as they had agreed on, without the restricting agreement. Thank you. I give the floor to my Bernd colleague again.
Madam President, honourable members of the Court, dear colleagues, I will respond to three issues raised by the defendants. Firstly, considering the conditions of the market, and in particular the free movement issue. The defendants raised the issue that there is no effective competition, and that there is nothing to prevent the employees from moving to other industries. While it is an innovation industry and one characterized by skilled workers, the claimants submit that defendants have failed to realize the fact that the skilled workers here have a path-dependent career. The more specialized they become and the more integrated they become in the wind turbine market, the less chance they have of moving to another industry. Moreover, how can we expect employees to simply get up and give up their career just because of an agreement agreed on between the defendants? Secondly, there was a comparison made between eBay and the state versus the state of California. This was indeed a very broad case in comparison to the one we have here. But this is even more of a reason to consider this agreement so anti-competitive. The agreement here is between direct competitors. The eBay case concerned competitors as well, but here it concerned many tech companies such as Apple, Google, Intuit, eBay. Here we have four main wind turbine producers in Mauritania that are agreeing to, one, not poach employees, but also to not hire these employees. Moreover, the ones that are benefiting from the agreement are entirely different from the ones affected by the agreement. Thirdly, concerning the joint and several liability of power on RWP, the defendants seem to have focused on the negative control, but have failed to realize that there is a number of factors here to take into consideration. The Court's case law has established that we must consider the legal and economic links as well. So the negative control is a core element, but there's also the fact that it has exercised its veto right, that it has developed RWP's market since its investment, and thirdly, as your Lordship has raised, the point that it even takes Powerol's name in RWP. There are a number of factors indicating here the size of influence. The defendants also raised the issue that the way it is financed is not relevant, as according to Höfner. This may be the case, however, the Commission has recently held that financing and investors can be held liable for the subsidiary's conduct, even if it is concerning an investment in the past. With this, I'd like to complete my submissions concerning the claimant.
Seeing as we are short on time, the defendants propose that we will respond directly to their rebuttals.
So how many of you will be speaking?
I believe all three of us will be speaking on the respective issues.
Well, in this case, you better be very short.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. In short, the claimants have tried to cast doubts that on the proposition that a legitimate objective is enough to exempt an agreement in the reach of 1011's objective. That is not acceptable by this court, for it is exactly the holding of the Mooter's case that a legitimate objective is sufficient to exempt an agreement from 1011's objective. Furthermore, the Mooter's agreement, the legit objective in that agreement was intangible. It was the reputation of the legal industry in the Netherlands. In this case, we have a more tangible, legitimate objective, that of innovation and environmental considerations, and therefore, a fortiori, this court should accept that this is a legitimate objective. Secondly, the claimants have said that we did not need to come to an agreement. Indeed, we could have adopted other measures such as individual moves to increase innovation and so on. However, we would like to point this court's attention to the fact that this industry is an oligopoly, and the status quo in an oligopoly is indeed to maintain the status quo, as any first mover would put his head on the chopping block, and the other three parties would reap the benefits at his expense. Therefore, to enact vast changes overnight in an oligopolistic situation, what is indeed needed is an agreement.
May I just ask, in that first mover environment, isn't one possible outcome winner takes all? I'm first, I'm best, and it all tips towards me.
That is one possible outcome, Your Lordship. However, according to the market shares of the oligopolies, of the oligopolistic nature of the market here, they seem to be pretty evenly spread, and there's no indication that one company is in a better position than the other. So I would say that possibility is somewhat remote. Thank you.
Alternate colleagues for the claimant argue that object restrictions are unlikely to qualify for an exemption under Article 113. Insofar as this is merely an empirical observation, we do not necessarily disagree. However, we emphasize that this is not a conceptual observation. Conceptually, the fact that an object restriction is inherently anti-competitive says nothing about whether it is likely to satisfy the Article 113 conditions. And if, in practice, object restrictions are unlikely to qualify for an exemption, it is not clear why this court should need to expressly recognize a presumption in any case. Thank you, Your Lordship.
On the members of this court, I would like to make 2 points in response. One in relation to the third issue, one in relation to the fourth issue. In relation to the third issue, clearly the no-poach agreement does not merely look at movement of labor to other industries. We are also looking at how the no-poach agreement is basically a short-term measure to tackle the problems that the manufacturers are facing in an urgent and speedy way. Ultimately, it is submitted that the incentives to compete for labor will kick in once these problems have been resolved. Secondly, in relation to the fourth issue, it is submitted that the factors proposed by the claimant, such as sharing a name, power on, these are clearly factors that do not meet the high threshold that has been established in the case law. Furthermore, the reference to financial investments and the need for compliance, I believe, is a reference to the recent power cables decision by the Commission. It is submitted that taking this argument too far would ultimately infringe on the basic principle of personal responsibility and fairness in deciding which companies should be held liable for an infringement. In conclusion, the defendants would like to reiterate that this is clearly not a simple or straightforward case that the claimants proposed, and it is submitted that the unduly formalistic and restrictive approach would ultimately not be beneficial to competition on the whole. And ultimately, we would also like to emphasize that this agreement was not entered into entirely of the defendant's own volition, and it is submitted that it is necessary to take into account how the agreement came about in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you. very thorough. We will now retire and deliberate.